We're at the Acadian Museum of Prince Edward Island here in Miscouche. We're here with Noella, and we're going to talk everything Acadian and museum, which is cool for me because my ancestry is not Acadian. I'm on the other side. I saw one of my potential ancestors in there. His teeth did not look good. We'll see that in a bit. But I like going to museums where I can learn about history that is not part of sort of my family's story, but other families' stories, because we all share the same story now. Wonderful museum. I took a quick little walk through, and it's just really well put together and very visual and everything. Tell me, I felt like I had a trip to the Vatican too. Which, folks will see what I mean, which, it's kind of like, I don't have, honey, to my wife, we don't have to go to Rome now. I've been there.
Miscouche.
Yeah, I took a close-up picture. The Pope might have been in there, you don't know. But tell me about the museum, and we're in the archives room, so it's not just a museum, it's a historical research center, genealogical center. A lot of community museums have that. So talk to us about how it was built, its genesis, what role it plays in the community, all that sort of stuff, as we sit across what we call the COVID table, because sadly we're still in the pandemic.
All right, the Acadian Museum started in 1964. In January 1964, the Association du Musée Acadien came about, and they determined to create the Acadian Museum of PEI. And so that very summer in 1964, they built a log cabin on this site. And that log cabin was up until around 1990, 1991, when they tore it down to build this building. And that first log cabin museum, the first volunteer director, was Sister Antoinette de Roche. And there was a board that was in charge of the museum, and they did a lot of collecting in the community back then. You had a lot of people coming, looking for antiques, buying off antiques. And so it was a place that people could bring the Acadian antiques over.
Right.
So we have a lot of artifacts that date from 1964 when people brought them in at that moment.
Like one big yard sale, but not a yard sale, more like a yard giveaway kind of thing.
Yeah. Just bring us your leftovers. We're happy to have them.
Because we're a museum. That's what we do until we can't take any more.
Yeah, and there are so many treasures that we got from back then that who knows where they would be now if it hadn't been for the museum to pick them up. And then in 1991, we built the present museum and opened it up officially to the public in 1992, like the official opening. And then in 1996, the Association du Musée Acadien negotiated with the PEI government, with the PEI Museum and Heritage Foundation, so that they would take over the building, and the employees are for the provincial government. And the association was still in charge of the research center and the artifacts.
Which is where we are now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we might have chased somebody out so we could do this interview, so he'll be back quickly. So what kind of research materials do you have here? Do you have genealogical records of all the different families that would have lived here? How far back do they go? If somebody wants to come research here, like the poor fellow we temporarily chased out for the interview, can they just walk in and say, hey, I'd like to look up my great-great-grandfather or something like that? How does that all work?
Yeah, in regular years, you could just walk in, and we have photocopies of records. Not quite back to the deportation, because many records were lost back then. Some records went down on the boats, and some were burned. So we only have records to the early 1800s for some communities. Some were lost when churches burned or whatever. And those records were transcribed into these cards here. And then the former genealogist that was here, he put them all together into family sheets. So we do have some families that are already put together. You got the couple, all of their children, and then on and on and on. Yeah.
So if you were to go talk to most folks on the street who didn't study history or Atlantic Canadian history, I think they'd be familiar with Acadia and the past. I think they would be familiar, or at least would have heard of the deportation. They might not know when it happened, but they would have known, English kicked French out, probably wasn't good for the French. And they probably would associate that with Grand Pre in Nova Scotia, and they probably would associate the Acadians with Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, in particular maybe New Brunswick. And talk a bit about Prince Edward Island's history. Now, let me see if I got this right. I have not done any advanced research. I'm going to travel back in time and try and remember my days as a history student. Ile Saint-Jean? Yes, yes. Thank goodness. That would have been embarrassing if I had gotten that wrong. But so Ile Saint-Jean was part of Acadia and part of the French colony. So talk a bit about the history of the people that were here, because they were part of the deportation as well, right?
Yeah. In 1720, you had the Comte de Saint-Pierre, who had the Compagnie de l'Île Saint-Jean, that had that needed people to come here to do the cod fisheries. So he recruited many people to come here. And so in 1720, there were many hundreds of families that came here to start off working in that. So you have like Port Lajoie area and what is the Greenwich area nowadays, like St. Saint-Pierre and all this. Yeah.
Oh, my wife's family's from the Greenwich area, so originally.
Yeah.
So I know it well.
Yeah, yeah, and most of that area was deported to France from that Greenwich area.
Honey, I know when you go walking through the national park, she'll often say, yeah, we used to have, this was our land, and then the government took it from us, or they nationalized it or whatever. And there's actually a little plaque memorial to the Sanderson family there if you walk. It's like, yes, well, about it being your land. Before it was your land. Whoopsie, didn't know that.
And before that, it was Epiquick.
Of course, yes. Yeah. So people are just taking land from other people. That's kind of how things rolled back then. I'm going to just take this opportunity now to speak directly to my wife. So, about your family and Greenwich. No, I've discovered there might be dark secrets in the past of the Sanderson family. So, a conversation we have when we get home where I go, well done. Although they don't have the land anymore, so it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, the federal government always takes it all. So, well, let's go. Thank you very much, Noella. Let's go have a look through the museum. The actual museum, take a walk through time. I like to pretend I'm a Time Lord. So, see, we have a running debate about whether folks understand Doctor Who or not.
Yeah,
so there we go, that one. There's one in the understand category. There's a few who look at me like, what? So, yeah, it has a very Time Lord-esque quality where you can start at the beginning, and it makes great sense as you walk around up to the modern day. So let's go take a look at the history of Ile Saint-Jean and the Acadians here on the island.
Okay.
All right. We'll be right back, folks, through the magic of space and time. We're hopping in my TARDIS, and we'll go see that exhibit. Ooh, that part's not going in. I just like to do it. I just got a shiver in my shoulder. I mean, like I said, my people, but even I don't want to be associated with these guys. War criminals. Who wants to be part of that? So here we are through the magic of space and time. And this is where you would start your journey through time. Now you have two choices. You can go left and travel back through time, which we don't recommend. I mean, I guess you could do that.
You could.
But much more interesting if we travel forward through time. So lovely, the Acadian flag, which is sort of lets you know what you're in for, and the story of a people, which I like because it's not artifacts and dates and all that sort of stuff. Museums are the stories of the people who lived, our ancestors. And the story that's told through here, like I said, I've already kind of walked through it, is a story of triumph and tragedy and overcoming adversity, and in the end, a story of hope and community, which is the best kind of story you can tell. So this is the part where we wander along. My TARDIS moves much faster. So what's over here? So what do we have here? This is, you start off and talk about the origins of the French community on Prince Edward Island, I assume?
Yeah, the origins of PEI. It starts off with it being called Epiquick. And the presence of the Mi'kmaq. They've been here over 10,000 years. And we mentioned that here. And then we called it Ile Saint-Jean. It was identified as Ile Saint-Jean as early as 1601. And it mentions Jacques Cartier when he just kind of passed through on his way. He mentions a bit of the geography that he saw here.
Well, I will read the English part. Because toute cette terre... Okay, moving on to the English part. All this, you could read the French part. Because we were talking French is your first language, right?
Yeah.
So, and there is a significant French-speaking community here in Prince Edward Island. So folks might not realize there are French schools here. There's a French college, is there? Or?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, something maybe you might not associate with PEI if you're not thinking about it. But yeah, there's this vibrant French community here, and schools and everything, and folks that still their first language is all Francais. Did I say no? Yeah, I'm not one of them. All this coast is low. You know what the truth is? I really wish I could speak French because it's a much more interesting language than English.
There's always time.
If you and I were to read this at the same, it's a running joke, which is the more romantic language.
Oh.
I guarantee you it's going to be this one as opposed to this one. I'd be like, all this coast is low and flat, but the finest land one can see, and full of beautiful trees and meadows. Fine. How does the first sentence sound when you read it?
Toute cette terre est basse et unie, la plus belle qu'il soit possible de voir, et pleine de beaux arbres et prairies. Mais en celle-ci ne peut me trouver havre parce que la terre est basse et le fond peu profond et tout rangé de sable. We have a very sing-song accent here in PEI.
My wife would be watching at home right now and she'd go, Paul sounds like he's ordering groceries or pizza or something, but that is very romantic. I'm not even quite sure.
See, you got to learn now.
Yes, no, well, we're already married, so I think if I want to keep her, I might actually have to learn how to speak French. She loves Paris. She goes to Paris, so she's actually, she speaks French much better than I do. So yeah, very romantic language, but also all throughout here, giving so that the story is accessible to both languages. The panels are dual, so people can read it in either language. And then we move over to what is a very happy-looking family over here. Look at that lovely farm, and what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just nice, typical Acadian happy lifestyle back in the 1700s.
Yeah, I'm sure that this just ended. It's a happy story. Uh-oh. And then, well, okay, we come over here. Spoiler alert, folks, the story takes a dark turn all of a sudden. So now we're into my people. There's a brief little part of this exhibit that, my folks here. But talk a bit about the deportation and talk a bit about, you have a particular sort of plaque here that talks about one family, and that one family kind of encapsulates just the tragedy and the sadness of what happened in just a terrible way.
Yeah, most people think of the deportation as starting in 1755. For us, it happened in 1758. And so they rounded up people, like starting off Port La Joie, going Hillsborough River, the area now is Greenwich, St. Peter's, all those places. They were rounding up people and bringing them to Port La Joie to get them ready for deportation. And those boats were not meant for passengers. They were cargo ships. And so we're imagining what the crossing would have been like. And from the Udi family, the ones that were here, they all went down with the ships. So there's no more Udi family in PEI. Because of that, they were all gone.
Right, so just totally wiped out. It's interesting when you read the story, you have this thing about the loss of the Duke William, which was another one of these ships that had 300 Acadian, they called them prisoners, on board. It sank. Captain Nichols and his crew survived, so the English crew survived. A Father Gerard and 4 Acadian men were the only non-English survivors. So I'm not exactly sure how that went down, but you can imagine the Acadians would have been down, almost like slave ships, would have been down under the decks. And as the ship goes down, the crew's like, well, I'm out of here, and tough luck for you. And they might have just all drowned. It's just terrible, sort of. Ugh.
And you think they weren't ready to have that many people, but that's not only in the space of the ship, but also in the food and in the water and in the space to sleep on. All of that, when you consider that, it was really horrible circumstances for them to be crossing on. So many people died even on the way over.
Right. And I mean, there's a term that we would use for this now. It would be called war crimes. You can win a war, you can lose a war, you can take, if you're going to win a war, you're going to get stuff. But you still have to behave to prisoners and to populations in a humane and legal way, and you can't go rounding people up and deporting them or killing them or whatever. So these, after the Second World War, these guys would have wound up at Nuremberg. They were committing the kinds of crimes, not the extent, but the sort of crimes that the Germans were prosecuted for after Nuremberg. So that's part of our history, and it's a sad part of our history. unfortunately. But out of the sadness comes the rest of the story is a bit of a story of triumph. So how do you overcome tragedy? Because that could have been the end, right, for the Acadians. That's the end of their story. And maybe we that live here now would look back and go, well, that's terrible. Our ancestors wasn't us. Terrible that they did that. But moving on, I'm heading to, Walmart or whatever. But actually, the Acadian story doesn't end with the deportation. It actually takes a bit of a twist and becomes a much better story of community's triumph over this tragedy. So the rest of the museum seems to talk about that. Mm-hmm. So we're in the low point here, folks. But now, through the magic of time and space, and I just got a shiver in my shoulder. I mean, like I said, my people, but even I don't want to be associated with these guys, like war criminals. Who wants to be part of that? These families before the tragic events would have been very happy families. And music and song would have been a large part of their life, I assume, because you can certainly see that in Acadian culture today. So, through the magic of space and time, it's a drinking game coming to the show soon, folks. Every time Paul says through the magic of space and time using my TARDIS, take a shot. We are now out of the terrible, terrible part of the story of the Acadians, and starting to get into the more uplifting part of overcoming tragedy and rebuilding your community. Although not, as I see behind you, without its own problems, so land ownership, for instance. So when the Acadians were deported, how did they come back, and what was waiting for them when they come back? How was the community rebuilt, basically?
Well, they didn't really have rights to their lands. So Samuel Holland divided up the land into 67 lots and townships. And so people had to start renting the land that they were on. And that caused some problems because the landlords of those lands were absentee for the most part. And they were demanding outrageous amounts for the rents. So eventually, some of the people left those areas and had agreements to go in other places. So that's how a lot of the geography of PEI led to people establishing themselves like in Tignish, Cascampec, the Evangeline region, which is known as being the more Francophone region. A lot of the people went over there because they had an agreement that they could go into Lot 15. And so that's how eventually they started establishing themselves, and then they could start to work on the land and have their own fishing and start to build up their economy. Around the 1860s, things started to go a bit better for them.
Right, and we sort of can see that played out here, talking about the kinds of things that they were doing. So, boot, off you go, we're taking your land. Maybe we'll let you back on. Oh my gosh, that is wonderful. You're giving us our land back. Hold on now. Didn't say we're giving it back to you. We can rent it to you, though, at an exorbitant rate. And you can work the land, and we will, sort of take the profit from it and all that. Yes, well, that sounds very British capitalism in the 19th century. So, and not in a good way. So, were the Acadians the ones that returned, I assume? Were the families that had originally lived on the land the ones that were actually coming here, or were there other French-speaking people?
There was a mixture of people who were originally here and some who weren't originally here and who came afterwards. When you talk about the dispersal, it's really the case for them. And some of the English landlords or other merchants realized that the Acadians knew what they were doing.
I was just about to say, why did they let them back? Because once you've gotten rid of them, and it's like, cool, the land is all ours. Now we can have English tenants. Wait, hold on. They don't seem to know what they're doing.
Yeah, because they knew the land. They knew how to work the land, and they knew the waters as well. So they hired them back on to help them out, and because they were the experts in how to do it. Like the dikes. Right. In Grand Pré, they had to have people that helped them out do the dikes. And here it's the same thing. We have dikes of our own here. So they needed people who knew that whole system to maintain the lands.
Oh, so they diked the land on Prince Edward Island too, or
there's some,
Okay. Yeah, no, you would definitely need some knowledge of how to, otherwise not so much. Interesting thing, well, there's a bunch of interesting things in here. I was a musician before I was a television host. People at home are going, you should go back to music. Well, funny story, folks. You're about to find out why that's not going to happen. So there's this song here, The Flight from Malpeque.
Yeah.
And I know Malpeque because there's a campground up there, I think, and a friend of mine who sort of has gone there every year, I think, with his family. I'm not going to sing the entire thing, but there is a verse, and it's in French and English, and you can sort of tell the story, exposed to the fury of those lions who plot to act with treachery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, yeah. I love musical theater. I'm terrible at it. But the last verse is literally, I enjoy making fun of myself in the show because this has been a bit of a sad story. Folks, a little bit of a laugh at my own expense, because this verse was written for me. It's as if I did travel back in time, wrote this myself, and now traveled forward in time and hear it. So, if my song is badly sung, I beg you to forgive me, for God gives to all creatures according to their nature. Some receive the gift to sing, but I do confess I lack that gift. And that's the end of the song. Like, there's this very, very sad song. It is us who gives them each a sheep, oh misery. And at the very end, he's like, listen, by the way, if you've been listening to this, the song was sad, but the singing was worse. So it's sort of a self-deprecating kind of way of looking at it, which again, you can come to a museum with a fair amount of tragedy over there and still have a little bit of a laugh and sort of remember that these families before the tragic events would have been very happy families and just a very happy community, and music and song would have been a large part of their life, I assume, because you can certainly see that in Acadian culture today, where music is such an integral part of that culture and of their life. The key to history is to try and find the commonalities between our different cultures and see where those points intersect and realize that we are all just, as Carl Sagan would have said, one group of people on a blue dot floating through space. And the things that unite us are far more important than the things that divide us. Like food. So I'm going to hop on my TARDIS. I'm going to go get some chicken frico and whatever else I can find. Probably not drown it in molasses. A little dodgy on the molasses. That's for you. But thank you very much, Noella, for giving us this tour of the Acadian Museum here in Prince Edward Island in Miscouche. I would recommend everybody come here. It could be a quick visit. Like, it's not going to take you all day, folks. But you can come through here, and it's so well laid out that the journey that you take from 1720 to 2021 is very clear for you, and you can see, as we've talked about multiple times, the tragedy, then the triumph before and definitely after, of how they've rebuilt this powerful community, this wonderful culture that is so much a part of our lives here in the Maritime provinces. So thanks to the folks of Miscouche and the museum, and thank you to Noella. And now, off we go to find chicken frico on Maritime Museums. My career as a songwriter ended a long time ago.